had just moved into my first apartment alone. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small one-bedroom place on the third floor of a quiet building tucked behind a row of old maple trees. The kind of place where the neighbors nodded politely, but everyone mostly kept to themselves. I liked it that way. After years of living with roommates, I was finally enjoying the peace and quiet of having my own space. Every morning, I'd make a cup of coffee and sit on the tiny balcony overlooking the parking lot. It didn't offer much of a view, just some cars, a flickering street light, and the back of a rundown gas station across the road. But it was peaceful. I could hear the birds chirping and the occasional hum of traffic. At night, I'd light a candle, throw on a hoodie, and scroll through my phone until I was tired enough to fall asleep. The place smelled like a mix of vanilla and old wood. It was cozy. I'd hang little string lights around the kitchen window, and there was this calming hum from the fridge that became kind of comforting. It felt safe, normal, just another quiet corner of the world where nothing ever really happened. Or at least, that's what I thought. At first, it was little things, barely noticeable. One morning, I woke up to find my balcony door slightly ajar. I chalked it up to my own carelessness, even though I could have sworn I locked it the night before. Maybe I hadn't pulled it shut all the way. It was a new habit I was still getting used to, remembering all the locks and routines of living alone. Then, a few days later, I came home from work and noticed my bathroom light was on. I hadn't been in there that morning. I stood in the doorway for a second, just staring at the bright glow spilling into the hallway. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I had a lot on my mind and just forgot. But the feeling stuck with me, like a whisper I couldn't quite make out. At night, I started hearing things, soft creaks in the hallway outside my apartment, like someone stepping slowly down the carpeted corridor. Once or twice, I peeked out the peephole, but there was never anyone there. I told myself it was the building settling, or maybe another tenant walking past my door. Still, I started sleeping with the bedroom door closed, even though I'd never felt the need to before. One evening, I noticed my favorite mug had moved. I always left it drying upside down beside the sink, but now it was sitting upright on the counter. My hands froze in the dishwater. I stared at it for what felt like minutes, trying to recall if maybe I had used it and forgot. It seemed ridiculous to be so unsettled by something so small, but it didn't feel like a mistake. That weekend, I tried to shake the weird vibe by inviting a friend over. She didn't notice anything off. We ordered pizza, watched a movie, and laughed like old times. But after she left, the silence in the apartment felt heavier than usual. I found myself turning on the TV just for background noise. The worst part was, I couldn't explain why I felt like someone was watching me. I hadn't seen anything, no signs of a break-in, no one lurking outside. But every time I walked through the apartment, I felt like I wasn't completely alone, like something invisible was just a few steps behind me. It all came to a head on a Wednesday night. I had just gotten out of the shower when I saw it. My bedroom window cracked open, not wide, just enough to make the curtain sway. I never opened that window, ever. My heart dropped. I stood there dripping, towel around me, frozen in the hallway. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't a draft or the building creaking. Someone had been in here. I rushed into the room, slammed the window shut and locked it. Then I tore through the apartment, checking every closet, every corner, under the bed, nothing. But the air felt different now, heavy, charged, like whoever had been there was still watching, just out of sight. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made me jump. I kept the lights on and sat in the living room with a kitchen knife clutched in my hand. My phone was fully charged, 911 ready to dial. I kept telling myself I was being dramatic. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. Around 3 a.m., I heard it. A soft tap on the balcony door. My heart stopped. I didn't move. Another tap. Then a slow, drawn-out squeak as the handle shifted. Someone was trying to open it. I jumped up and ran to the door, locking it again and yanking the curtain closed. I didn't even look outside. I couldn't. I didn't want to see who or what was out there. I grabbed my keys and bolted, barefoot, barely dressed, and didn't stop running until I was in my car. I didn't care that it was the middle of the night. I drove to a friend's house across town and pounded on her door until she let me in. I couldn't go back. Not yet. Something was wrong in that apartment. Something was very my friend for a couple of days. Very wrong. Trying to convince myself I'd imagined it all. Sleep helped. So did being around someone else. But by the third day, I felt silly, embarrassed even. No signs of forced entry, no stolen items. Just my paranoia, or so I thought. I went back to the apartment during daylight, figuring it'd be easier that way. I was tense the whole drive, but when I stepped inside, everything looked normal, too normal, like someone had taken the time to reset it. Even the mug was back beside the sink, upside down. I decided to pack a few essentials and leave again, maybe stay with my parents for a while. As I pulled my suitcase from under the bed, I noticed something. A smell, faint, sour, like sweat and something rotting. My skin went cold. I followed the scent, heart pounding. It led me to the hallway closet. I hadn't opened it in weeks. I reached for the handle, hesitated, then yanked it open. Nothing. Just coats, a vacuum, a few boxes. But then I saw it. At the very back, the crawlspace panel was loose. I didn't even know there was a crawlspace. My breath caught as I leaned closer. Scratched into the inside of the panel were tally marks, dozens of them. And behind the panel, in the darkness, I saw eyes, wide, staring, unblinking. I screamed and stumbled back, slamming the door shut. Something thumped from inside, heavy, alive. I didn't think. I ran like hell, not stopping until I hit the street, screaming for help. Someone had been living in my walls, watching me, waiting. The police came. They searched the apartment top to bottom and found clear signs that someone had been living in the crawlspace. Old food wrappers, a blanket, a small pile of my things, hair ties, receipts, even one of my t-shirts. The crawlspace led to a larger maintenance shaft that ran along the side of the building. No one knew it was even accessible from inside the unit. They never found him. Whoever he was, he vanished. Gone before the police arrived, like smoke slipping through cracks. I moved out that same week. My friend helped me box up what I could stomach to keep, but I left most of it behind. I didn't want anything that had been touched, watched, stolen while I slept. Even now, in a new place, with new locks and alarm systems, I can't shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. I check closets twice, sleep with a flashlight on my nightstand. I wake up at the slightest creak, my heart racing before my eyes are even open. Sometimes, I still hear that soft tap at the door in the middle of the night. And once, just once, I came home and found the balcony curtain slightly swaying. The window was locked. Nothing was taken, but I swear I saw something in the reflection of the glass. Just a flicker, a shape, a face. People tell me I'm safe now, that it's over, but I know better. You don't forget the feeling of someone hiding in your walls. You don't ever really stop wondering if they're still there, waiting. I used to take the same bus to work every morning, 7:15 a.m. sharp. I'd grab a coffee from the corner shop, plug in my earbuds, and stand at the bus stop near my apartment complex. It wasn't a busy area, just a quiet residential street with cracked sidewalks and a few trees shedding leaves onto the pavement. I liked the routine. It made life feel stable. I'd nod to the same dog-walking lady every morning, watch the same rusty pickup rumble past, and ride the same route downtown. Nothing exciting ever really happened there, and honestly, that was fine with me. There was a small bench at the stop, usually empty. I preferred standing anyway. I'd sip my coffee, scroll through my phone, and wait for the squeaky brakes of the city bus to signal it was time to go. It was cold that time of year. I'd wrap myself in a thick scarf and watch my breath fog up in the air. Some mornings were foggier than others, and the world would feel a little more distant, quieter, but still, it was my space. Familiar, predictable, until one day, it wasn't. The first time I noticed him, He was just standing at the far end of the sidewalk, across the street from the bus stop. He wasn't waiting for a bus, just standing there. No phone, no coffee, just watching. He looked ordinary, maybe mid-40s, wearing a black jacket and a beanie pulled low over his head. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was waiting for someone. But he didn't move, didn't check the time, just stared. The next morning, he was there again. Same spot, same posture, just watching. I glanced at him a couple of times, hoping he'd acknowledge it, give a nod or look away like a normal person might. But he didn't. His eyes stayed locked on the bus stop, on me, the whole time. I told myself I was overthinking it. Big city, weird people. It happens. But then he started showing up earlier. I'd walk down the street and spot him already standing there, like he'd been waiting, never speaking, never moving, just watching. The worst part, he never got on the bus. He never did anything except be there. One day, I took a different route to the stop, looping around a side street. But when I got there, he was already across from it. How did he know? I started getting this tight feeling in my chest every morning, like my body was trying to warn me before my brain could catch up. I stopped making eye contact. I stopped using my earbuds. I just stared down the street, waiting for the bus like it was a lifeline. One morning, I decided to leave for work later, miss the usual bus, just to break the pattern. I waited an extra 20 minutes, watching through my apartment window. He was still there. Even without me, he was still there. That's when I knew it wasn't random. This man, whoever he was, wasn't just some stranger who happened to be on my street. He was watching me, and not just casually. He knew my schedule, my movements, where I lived. I started to panic. The next day I called in sick and stayed home. I didn't leave the apartment once, but every hour or so I'd peek through the blinds, heart racing. He was there, across the street, alone, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on my building. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, not because I thought I'd use it, but because I had no idea what else to do. Every creak of the floorboards, every shifting shadow from the hallway light sent me into full body alert. I filed a report with the police. They took it down, said they'd look into it, but didn't sound particularly concerned. I didn't have his name. I didn't have video. Just a vague description of a guy standing on a public sidewalk. They said unless he tried to enter my home or made direct threats, there wasn't much they could do. That night, I taped blackout curtains over my windows. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want him to see me. But around midnight, I heard something. A thump, software repetitive. I crept to the door and held my breath. Another thump, then a pause, then a low, dragging scrape along my door. I backed away, trembling. I didn't even look through the peephole. I just stood there staring, too scared to speak or scream or even move. Then, a whisper, right outside the door. "Why'd you change your routine?" I lost it, called the police again, screamed at them through the phone. But by the time they arrived, the hallway was empty. Whoever he was gone. 2 days later, I booked a hotel. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a bag, called off work, and planned to be gone for at least a week. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I turned off location sharing. I even left my car parked a few blocks away and took a rideshare to the hotel. It felt like the first time I could breathe in weeks, but the peace didn't last. On the third night, there was a knock at my door. Not the hotel staff, not housekeeping. A slow, deliberate knock. 3 times. I froze. I hadn't told a single soul where I was. Toward the door, not even barely breathing, and looked through the peephole. He was there, the man from the bus stop, standing just outside my hotel room. I staggered back, heart slamming in my chest. I had locked the door. I knew I had, but I still grabbed a chair and shoved it under the knob. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold my phone. I called the front desk, told them someone was outside my room. I could barely get the words out. Security came up within minutes, but he was gone. Again, no cameras had caught him entering, no name on the guest list, no record of him checking in. They said maybe I imagined it. Stress, lack of sleep, but I know what I saw. I know it was him. After that night, I didn't go back to my apartment. I stayed at the hotel for another week, And when I finally returned to get my things, everything felt off. My apartment was the same, empty, silent, and too quiet. But the tension in my chest never went away. I moved to a new place, far from that street. I changed my routine, my phone number, and even my email. I told myself that was enough, that he couldn't find me if I didn't let him. But something lingered. The fear, the thought that he might still be out there, somewhere, watching. A few months later, I received a package. No return address, just my name, written neatly on the front in black ink. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of me, taken from across the street, in front of my new building. The man from the bus stop was in the corner of the shot, blurry but unmistakable. He wasn't facing the camera. He was looking at me. The photograph had been taken recently. I could tell by the construction happening on the sidewalk nearby. I don't know how he found me. I don't know how he's always so close. I burned the picture. I called the police again, but they told me they couldn't do anything unless I had more evidence. And now, every time I walk outside, I feel like someone is waiting for me, just beyond my line of sight. Watching, waiting. I changed my routine again, but I wonder, will it ever be enough? Or is he still out there, always just one step behind? It was just another Thursday night. I had just moved into my new apartment a week before, and to be honest, I was starting to feel at home. The place was cozy, nothing fancy, but it was mine. The quiet street outside was a welcome change from the hustle and bustle of the city I had been used to. I liked the solitude. It felt peaceful. The building itself was old, creaky, with wooden floors that groaned when I walked over them. There were only a few other tenants, most of whom kept to themselves. I didn't mind. I worked long hours and often stayed in during the evenings, binge watching shows or reading. It was my sanctuary. After a busy day, I usually got home around 7 p.m., ordered takeout, and spent the rest of the night in my apartment. Nothing exciting, just routine. But on that particular night, something felt off. When I walked through the door, the air felt heavy, thick, like I wasn't alone. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just the stress of settling into a new place. The unfamiliar creaks and noises of a building that was older than I was used to. It wasn't until I noticed the lights flickering that I started to feel uneasy. And then it happened. The lights in the hallway flickered again, but this time, they didn't stop. The buzzing sound they made echoed in my ears, a little louder than usual. I glanced up at the ceiling, expecting to see a bulb burn out, but it was still there, flickering intermittently, as though something was tampering with it. I stepped into the living room, and that's when I felt it. An odd sensation creeping up my spine. Something was wrong. It wasn't just the lights. It felt like someone had been here. I couldn't explain it. I was alone. Or at least I thought I was. The door to my bedroom was ajar, just a sliver, but it wasn't like that when I left this morning. I always closed it. I'd been so careful with the little things, the routine, but now the door was open, as though someone had been in there, had touched it, pushed it open. My pulse quickened, and I walked over to the door slowly. There was no sound, no movement, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I peered inside. Nothing seemed out of place. The bed was made. My clothes were where I had left them, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and a cold chill swept through me. I closed the door with a sense of relief, telling myself I was being paranoid. It was a new apartment. Maybe the door had just loosened from the old building's quirks. Maybe a draft. But deep down, I knew something was off. The next night, I came home to the same feeling. The lights flickered again. The door was slightly ajar, and I could swear I heard a faint rustling sound from inside my room. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That's when I heard. I needed to figure out what was going on. Almost inaudible whisper. It was coming from inside my bedroom. I froze. Someone was in there. My heart raced. I stood frozen at the edge of the hallway, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. The whispering was too soft, too distant to be clear, but it was there, definitely there. My body was flooded with fear, and every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't move. I strained to listen. The whispering stopped for a moment, then came again. This time, it was closer, almost directly behind my bedroom door. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sent chills down my spine. I had to act. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy bookend from my shelf, and crept toward the door. My fingers trembled as I reached for the doorknob. The seconds felt like hours. Every noise in the apartment now felt amplified, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I took a deep breath, bracing myself, and swung the door open. Nothing. The room was exactly as I had left it. My bed, the window, the clothes on the floor. Nothing was disturbed. The air felt still and thick, but there was no sign of anyone. No movement, no figure, hiding in the shadows. But then I noticed it, a shadow in the corner. At first, I thought it was just the dim lighting playing tricks on me, but as I focused, I realized it was moving, just slightly, as if someone was standing there, barely visible against the wall, the outline of a figure, hunched slightly, almost blending into the dark. I could barely breathe. My legs felt like lead, and my hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold onto the bookend. It wasn't a trick of the light. There was someone in my room, and they were watching me. I didn't know what to do. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave. The shadow in the corner didn't move, but it was there, looming, watching. My grip tightened on the bookend, knuckles white, my breath shallow and rapid. For a moment, I thought about running, just bolting from the apartment, from the building. But something held me in place. I couldn't take my eyes off that shadow. What if it moved? What if it came after me? And then I saw it. The faintest shift in the darkness. A hand, slowly emerging from the corner, pale and thin, reaching toward me. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I screamed, loudly, a frantic, terrified scream that echoed off the walls. And in that instant, the shadow moved. It didn't just rise from the corner, it lunged forward, and I instinctively stepped back, tripping over my own feet. My heart was pounding in my throat. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. The figure was coming at me, its movements jerky, unnatural. I swung the bookend wildly, striking something hard, and heard a grunt, a low, strangled sound. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I had hit, a person. But before I could react further, the room went completely silent. The figure collapsed to the floor, revealing a man, his face contorted in a grotesque expression of anger, his eyes wild. He didn't move, didn't even make a sound. I stood there frozen, my eyes locked on his. It wasn't until I saw the small knife clenched in his hand that I realized how close I had come to something much worse. I didn't move. I couldn't. My entire body was locked in place, my mind still processing what had just happened. This wasn't some random break-in. This man had been in my apartment, in my bedroom, for who knows how long. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but suddenly, they were there, loud and piercing. I had called the police the moment the man collapsed to the floor, but the seconds felt like hours. The officers arrived within minutes, but by then, the man was unconscious, his knife still clutched in his hand. They took him away, still not fully awake, but the terror didn't leave with him. I didn't feel safe in my apartment anymore. Even with the locks on the doors, the deadbolt, the security system, I couldn't shake the feeling that he could still be there, watching from the shadows. The police said they didn't know how long he had been stalking me. He had no prior record. They found no connection between us. They couldn't figure out how he got in, or how he knew my routine so well. His story made no sense, but I didn't need to hear any of that. I didn't care. All I knew was that for weeks, I had been living with the knowledge that someone was in my space, silently lurking, watching from the shadows. That knowledge had changed something inside me. I couldn't look at the darkness the same way anymore. Now, every time I enter a room, every time I walk down a hallway, I wonder, is he still out there, waiting? Or was there someone else waiting in the shadows? I had just started my new job in a downtown office building. It was everything I had worked for, close to home, modern facilities, and the kind of career opportunity that doesn't come by every day. The building was sleek and shiny, one of those high-rises with glass walls and polished floors that made you feel like you were in the future. Every morning, I'd walk in, swipe my ID badge, and take the elevator up to the top floor where my office was located. I had a set routine: grab coffee from the lobby, catch up on emails, and then settle in for the workday. There was nothing unusual about it. It was all so ordinary. But then I started to notice him. It wasn't on the first day or the second. It was probably the third or fourth week when I first saw him. He wasn't someone I knew. I had no idea who he was. But every morning, without fail, he'd get into the same elevator as me. We'd ride up together, and I'd try to avoid eye contact, not wanting to seem rude, but also feeling a little uneasy for some reason. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe he worked in the building too. Maybe he was just another employee. But something about his presence felt off. He was always standing too close, his body language a little too intense, like he was studying me. I tried to ignore it. But then, on the fourth week, he did something that made my skin crawl. It happened one morning when the elevator door slid open, and there he was again, standing just behind the threshold, waiting for me. His eyes were fixed on me, intense, unblinking. I could feel his gaze even before I stepped inside. I smiled politely, as I always did, and pressed the button for my floor. This time, though, something was different. He didn't press a button. He just stood there, staring at me. I couldn't bring myself to meet his eyes, so I focused on the floor numbers above the door, watching the light flicker with each passing floor. But the longer the ride went, the more I could feel his presence, like it was too heavy in the air. As the elevator approached my floor, I felt an almost physical sense of relief. I reached for the button to exit, but just before the doors opened, I heard him speak. "Do you like the building?" His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it was loud enough to make me jump. I turned to look at him, and for the first time, I saw his face clearly. He wasn't smiling. His expression was blank, but there was a faint gleam in his eyes, something calculating. "Yeah," I answered, fumbling with my purse. "It's nice." There was a pause, a beat of silence that stretched on too long. Then, almost casually, he asked, "What floor are you on?" It felt like an innocent enough question, but something about it unsettled me. Why did he need to know? I quickly glanced at the floor indicator, counting the floors until mine would arrive. "Just the 7th floor," I said, trying to brush it off. The elevator doors slid open, and I quickly stepped out. But as I exited, I could feel his eyes still on me, still following my every move. I tried to shake the feeling, to tell myself it was nothing. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I entered the elevator, I kept expecting him to be there. At first, it was just a weird coincidence. But after the 4th or 5th time, I realized it was no longer random. He was there every morning, just as the doors opened. His gaze was always fixed on me, and he never said a word unless I did first. The silence was unnerving, like he was studying my every move, trying to figure me out. I would press the button for my floor, and he would just stand there, too close, with his eyes locked on mine. He never looked away, never glanced at the floor number, never moved. I started to feel like I couldn't breathe. The air in the elevator became thick, and my heart would start to race every time the doors slid open, wondering if he would be there. He never said anything threatening, but his presence alone felt like a threat. I tried avoiding eye contact, keeping my gaze fixed forward, but there was no way to ignore him. Then one day, as the elevator was nearing my floor, I glanced at him, just for a moment. His lips curled into the faintest smile, a slow, unsettling smirk that made my stomach churn. My floor arrived, and I rushed out of the elevator without a second thought. But this time, as I stepped out, I heard his voice again. "You should be more careful," he said softly, almost as if he was speaking to himself. "Someone might see you." I froze. That was the first time I felt the sharp, icy prick of fear. He knew something. He knew more than he should. I didn't wait around to hear more. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my legs felt like jelly. I quickly turned and walked away, keeping my head down, trying to push the unease from my mind. But as I walked through the lobby, I could feel his gaze still burning. I couldn't bring myself to take the elevator. I had to take the stairs. My usual calm was replaced with panic, my every step echoing in the stairwell. I was trying to shake off the fear, trying to tell myself it was all in my head. But I knew it wasn't. When I arrived at my office on the 7th floor, I was already exhausted from the anxiety. But as the day went on, the dread didn't fade. It only grew. At lunch, I overheard some co-workers talking about strange things happening in the building. An odd man, seen near the stairwell, someone whispering about a creepy guy in the elevator. My stomach dropped. Could they have been talking about him? That evening, I left work late. The office building was nearly empty. As I stepped into the elevator, I froze. He was there. This time, he didn't wait for the doors to close. Without a word, he moved toward me, his hand reaching out to press the button for the ground floor. But his fingers brushed mine as he did, and the touch sent an icy shock through my skin. I stepped back, my voice shaky. "What do you want?" He just smiled again, that same unsettling smirk. "You don't remember me, do you?" he whispered. I could feel my pulse quicken, the words he spoke sending a cold chill down my spine. I stepped back, my back pressed against the cool elevator wall, trying to steady my breathing. The floor indicator above the door blinked, slowly moving toward the ground, but time seemed to slow, each second dragging on longer than the last. Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer at first. His eyes were locked onto mine, studying me with an eerie focus. Then finally, he spoke. "Do you remember the man you met in the parking garage 3 months ago?" My blood ran cold. The parking garage. It took me a moment to piece it together. I had brushed past a man one evening, after work, when I dropped my keys. He'd helped me pick them up, smiled, and made some small talk. It seemed like nothing. But now, I was certain I hadn't imagined the lingering look he'd given me, the strange way he'd asked about my schedule. No, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I don't know you." The elevator doors opened to the ground floor. He didn't move. He just stood there, smiling at me with those unsettling eyes. "Maybe you will one day," he said, his voice low. "Maybe you'll remember everything." I rushed out of the elevator, not daring to look back. The lobby was empty, but the feeling of his presence followed me like a shadow. I hurried to my car, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I've never seen him again, but every time I enter an elevator now, I wonder, is he still out there? I was going through a rough patch when it all started. It had been a long week. Work had been overwhelming. I'd barely slept, and I just needed a break. So, on a Saturday afternoon, I decided to take a walk through the park near my apartment. It wasn't a huge park, just a small green space with a few walking paths, benches, and a pond. The kind of place where you could sit for hours, listening to birds, letting your mind wander. I often walked there when I needed to clear my head. It was quiet and peaceful, especially on weekends when the crowd was usually light. The weather was perfect that day, sunny, with a slight breeze. I left my phone at home, wanting to disconnect for a while, and just wandered along the path, enjoying the fresh air. But as I walked past the first bench near the entrance, I noticed him. At first, I thought nothing of it. There was an older man sitting there, wearing a worn-out coat, holding a book. He looked harmless, engrossed in whatever he was reading. He didn't even glance up as I passed by. I kept walking, but the feeling that something wasn't quite right started to settle in. Maybe it was the way he was sitting so still, his body rigid and unmoving. Maybe it was just the loneliness of the park, the emptiness surrounding us. But whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I shook off the uneasy feeling and continued on my walk, trying to focus on the peaceful surroundings. But the thought of that man sitting on the bench lingered in the back of my mind. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking. Maybe he was just a regular park goer, nothing more. As I made my way around the pond, I noticed the path curving back toward the entrance. I was heading toward the spot where I had seen the man. And as I walked closer, I felt that prickling sensation on the back of my neck. It was as if someone was watching me, and I couldn't shake it. When I passed by the bench again, he was still there. But this time, I noticed something strange. His book was closed now, resting in his lap, and his eyes were fixed directly on me. Not just glancing, he was staring, unblinking, like he was waiting for me to approach. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way he looked at me that made my heart skip a beat. I quickened my pace, trying to avoid eye contact, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was following me with his gaze. I glanced over my shoulder as I walked, and sure enough, his head was turned, his eyes still locked on me. I walked faster, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The park was still mostly empty, but now it felt more isolating. I tried to brush off the feeling of paranoia, but it was hard. As I reached the far side of the park, I looked back once more. The man had stood up. He wasn't sitting anymore, and he was walking toward me. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him take slow, deliberate steps toward me. He wasn't in any hurry, but he wasn't stopping either. The casual pace he moved with felt all the more unnerving. His face was still expressionless, his eyes locked on mine. There was no reason for him to be walking in my direction. The path split ahead, and there was no reason for him to follow me. But he did. I turned quickly, trying to steady my breathing. I needed to get away from him, but the park felt so vast and open, and yet in that moment, it felt suffocating. I glanced around, but there was no one else in sight. Not a single person, no joggers or families, just me and him, in the middle of nowhere. I tried to pick up my pace, but the man's footsteps were growing louder, closer. He wasn't running, just walking slowly, almost like he knew I'd hear him. My heart was now in my throat. My legs were moving faster, but my mind felt paralyzed. Was he following me? I turned another corner, praying to find someone, anyone. But the park was eerily empty, like a place trapped in time. Then I heard something, a faint rustling, a low voice. "Do you think I won't find you?" I froze, my blood running cold. The words were so calm, so chillingly detached. I didn't dare look back. I forced myself to run, but every step felt like a heavy drag, like I was moving in slow motion. The man's footsteps behind me quickened, echoing in the stillness. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I needed to get out of the park. I needed to... And then, out of nowhere, I tripped. I hit the ground hard, my hands scraping against the rough pavement. For a split second, everything went numb. The air felt thick, my mind racing as I tried to push myself up. My palms burned from the impact, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I scrambled to my feet, panic surging through my veins. But before I could make a move, I heard his voice again, closer this time, almost directly behind me. "You can't run forever," he whispered, in my throat, his voice strangely calm. I dared a quick glance over my shoulder. The man was standing just a few feet away, his cold eyes fixed on me. He hadn't broken into a run, but his presence felt like it was suffocating the life out of me. "Please," I begged, my voice shaky. "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he just stood there, his lips twitching, as though he were amused by my fear. My heart raced, thumping in my chest like it might explode. The stillness of the park was now suffocating. I was completely alone, no one around to help. He reached into his coat pocket, and I flinched, fearing a weapon, or something worse. But when he pulled his hand out, there was nothing in it. He was just standing there, staring. "I just wanted to know if you'd remember me," he said quietly, his voice almost like a confession. And then, in a blink, he was gone. I stood there, for what felt like an eternity, staring at the spot where he had been only moments ago. My breath was ragged, my body frozen in place. The fear that had gripped me was starting to give way to confusion, and then to a deep, unsettling feeling of dread. He had vanished without a sound, as if he had never been there at all. I looked around, expecting to see someone, anyone, nearby, but the park was still empty. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, and the distant hum of traffic barely reached me. It was as though everything was normal again, but I knew deep down that it wasn't. I couldn't explain what had just happened. The man's words, "I just wanted to know if you'd remember me," echoed in my mind, rattling around like a dark secret I couldn't understand. I didn't want to be in the park any longer. My legs were shaking as I turned and started walking toward the exit, faster now, like I was being pulled by some invisible force. But when I reached the gate, something made me stop. I looked back once more. There, on the far side of the park, I saw him again. He was standing at the same spot near the bench where I had first noticed him. His eyes were locked on me, and he didn't move, just watching. I walked quickly, almost running now, out of the park and back to my apartment. I've never gone back since, and sometimes, when I'm walking down the street late at night, I'll see a shadow in the corner of my eye, a figure standing still watching, and I wonder, is it him